July 28, 1980, 7:15 at night. Howard Beach, Queens. John Favara walked toward his car and never made it. Baseball bat to the skull from behind, dropped like a stone. Four men grabbed him, dragged him into a windowless van, doors slammed. 11 seconds start to finish. 200 witnesses on the street in summer evening heat. Nobody moved. Nobody called police. Favara's wife screaming from the apartment window above. Nobody helped. 4 months earlier, Favara's car had struck 12-year-old Frank Gotti on his motorized minibike. Accident. Police cleared him. No charges. But Frank was John Gotti's son, and the Gambino captain was in Fort Lauderdale that night, with casino receipts and restaurant reservations. Perfect alibi. The FBI opened a case the next morning and closed it 6 weeks later. 0 arrests, 0 witnesses, 0 evidence. This is how the mob erases someone in broad daylight while the FBI watches and does nothing. March 18, 1980, 5:30 in the afternoon, and Frank Gotti was riding his motorized minibike down Ruger's Court in Howard Beach like he'd done 100 times before. 12 years old, dark hair, his father's smile, the youngest of John Gotti's children, and everyone knew it. The minibike had been a Christmas gift 3 months earlier. Chrome handlebars and a small engine that buzzed like a hornet. The sound echoed between the narrow houses, familiar to every neighbor on the block. John Favara was driving home from Castro Convertibles, where he sold furniture to middle-class families who paid in installments. 51 years old, married, living 4 houses down from the Gottis for 4 years without ever understanding who his neighbors really were. Frank darted from behind a dumpster into the street. Favara hit the brakes. Too late. The impact threw Frank 15 feet. 6 neighbors saw it happen. Every single one would later tell police it was unavoidable, a tragic accident, nobody's fault. Frank was rushed to the hospital with massive internal injuries. He died that night. John Gotti was in Atlantic City when it happened, got the call, drove back in silence that lasted the entire trip. The police report was clear. Accidental death, no criminality, case closed. The motorized minibike, front wheel crushed and bent, was tagged as evidence and locked away. It would sit in storage for 4 months. By 1980, John Gotti was already a legend in Queens, though most of America didn't know his name yet. Gambino crime family captain, controlling rackets from loan sharking to construction kickbacks, pulling in millions annually with the kind of efficiency that got you noticed by bosses like Paul Castellano. He dressed like a movie star, custom suits from Italian tailors, silk ties, shoes that cost more than most men's monthly rent. They'd start calling him the Dapper Don later, but the style was already there in 1980. Sharp, visible, fearless. He held court at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, where associates came to pay respect and receive orders. Frank had been his favorite son, the kid who still looked at his father like he was invincible. Victoria Gotti, John's wife, was fierce Italian mother and mob wife in equal measure. Loyal to death, protective beyond reason, the kind of woman who'd go to war for her children without hesitation. The Gotti family lived in Howard Beach like normal people, or at least they tried to. Neighbors knew the name meant danger, meant respect, meant don't ask questions. John Favara had lived 4 houses away since 1976 and never suspected a thing. The motorized minibike John had given Frank sat in the garage most of winter. In spring, it became Frank's freedom, his independence, his last ride. March 22, 1980, Frank Gotti's funeral drew over 300 people to the church in Howard Beach. John Gotti stood at the front in a black suit, face composed but eyes dead, the kind of rage that doesn't show because it's too deep to surface yet. Victoria collapsed at the graveside, screaming her son's name, held up by relatives while the casket lowered into earth. The sound of her grief cut through the cemetery like something physical. John Favara stayed home. He was terrified to show his face, knew instinctively that showing up would be suicide even though, legally, he'd done nothing wrong. The funeral was a who's who of Gambino associates, captains, soldiers, enforcers, all paying respects to a child, but really showing loyalty to the father. The message in that crowd was clear. This wouldn't be forgotten. New York City police photographed attendees from unmarked cars, adding faces to files, building charts of organized crime relationships. The memorial card featured Frank's school photo and below it, a picture of his motorized minibike. That night, Favara's phone rang at midnight. Heavy breathing, then silence. Then the line went dead. It was the first death threat. It wouldn't be the last. The calls would continue every night for months. April 1980, and the harassment began in earnest. Anonymous calls to the Favara home every night, sometimes breathing, sometimes silence, sometimes just the sound of traffic in the background before the click of disconnection. Favara's house was spray-painted in the early morning hours of April 7th. Murderer, in dripping red letters across the garage door. His car tires were slashed twice in 2 weeks. His wife begged him to move immediately, sell everything, leave New York, start over somewhere the Gotti name meant nothing. Favara listed the house for sale at $20,000 below market value, desperate for any buyer who'd close fast. John Gotti remained publicly silent, never mentioned Favara's name, attended to Gambino business with the same cold efficiency as always. But privately, according to those close to him, he was seething, trapped between grief and the knowledge that the law had protected the man who killed his son. The FBI was watching Gotti, expecting retaliation, documenting his movements, waiting for him to make a mistake. Favara told co-workers at Castro Convertibles the same thing every day. "They're gonna kill me." The motorized minibike still sat in the police evidence locker, waiting to be released. Every day, Favara looked over his shoulder. Every night, he checked the locks twice, then 3 times. May 1980, and Victoria Gotti spotted John Favara at the supermarket on Cross Bay Boulevard. She followed him to the parking lot carrying a baseball bat she'd grabbed from her car trunk. Wooden, heavy, the kind Little League fathers bring to weekend games. She beat him in front of a dozen witnesses, screaming about Frank, about justice, about how he'd murdered her son and walked away free. Favara raised his arms to protect his head, took hits to the ribs, the back, the shoulders. The sound of wood on bone echoed across the parking lot. Police arrived within minutes. The witnesses, all Howard Beach locals, all people who understood the code, claimed Victoria had acted in self-defense, said Favara had provoked her, threatened her first. Lies, but coordinated lies. The kind that hold up because everyone tells the same version. No charges were filed against Victoria Gotti. Favara was hospitalized with broken ribs and deep bruising. The Gotti family solidarity was absolute. The neighborhood protected their own, and Victoria was one of them. Favara knew then that the legal system wouldn't help him. The police couldn't protect him. The law that had cleared him of Frank's death couldn't save him from what was coming. 2 detectives visited him in the hospital and told him something off the record. "Get out of town. We can't protect you here." It was the most honest thing any official would say to him. The twist nobody expected. The police themselves were telling him to run because they knew what Gotti could do and knew they were powerless to stop it. When you're hooked now, wait, because it gets worse. June 1980, and Favara sold his house to a buyer who paid cash and closed in 8 days. Later identified as a known Gambino associate, though that detail would only surface in FBI reports years afterward. The message was clear. Even Favara's escape was controlled, monitored, permitted only on terms the family dictated. He booked plane tickets to Florida for August 5th, bought them for himself and his wife, one-way tickets to Fort Lauderdale, where they had distant relatives and a chance to disappear into a city where nobody knew the Gotti name. Favara spent June packing belongings, paranoid and sleepless, checking windows every hour, watching cars that drove past too slowly. The summer heat made everything worse. The anxiety, the fear, the constant surveillance he felt but couldn't prove. Meanwhile, John Gotti was consolidating power within the Gambino family, getting approval from boss Paul Castellano for moves that would eventually position him for leadership. FBI informants inside the family reported chatter. The Favara problem will be handled. No specifics, no timeline, just certainty. Witnesses around Howard Beach began seeing a black van with tinted windows circling Favara's block. Mornings, evenings, always slow, always watching. Favara's final weeks at Castro Convertibles were a countdown, every shift one day closer to escape. He told his manager he was leaving early, couldn't wait until August. Too dangerous to stay. The motorized minibike evidence had been dismantled, ready for official disposal or return to family. Favara counted days like a prisoner counting toward release, not understanding that his sentence had already been decided. 37 days until his flight, then 30, then 20. Each morning he woke up surprised to still be alive. July 25, 1980, John Gotti flew to Fort Lauderdale on a commercial flight, checked into a hotel, and proceeded to create the most documented alibi of his criminal career. Casino receipts, restaurant reservations. Witnesses who saw him at the hotel pool, at the blackjack tables, at a steakhouse where he tipped the waiter $50 on a $100 meal. July 26th through 28th, Gotti was visible and verifiable in Florida, smiling, tipping well, gambling with cash, behaving exactly like a man on vacation. FBI surveillance photos would later confirm his presence 1,000 miles from New York during the critical window. He played blackjack for hours, lost money deliberately, made sure dealers remembered him. Meanwhile, back in Queens, 4 men received orders. The instructions were simple, verbal, never written down. Handle the Favara situation, do it clean, make sure there's no comeback. Favara had no idea Gotti was out of state. He didn't follow mob news, didn't track Gotti's movements, was just trying to survive until his flight 11 days away. The twist that law enforcement would later recognize. Gotti's absence wasn't coincidence. It was permission. His physical departure from New York was the signal that execution was authorized. As long as Gotti was in Florida with witnesses and receipts, he couldn't be connected to anything that happened in Howard Beach. It was strategic brilliance disguised as a vacation. The kind of move that made Gotti legendary in organized crime circles. Always 3 steps ahead, always protected, always untouchable. July 28, 1980, was John Favara's last day at Castro Convertibles. He told his boss that morning he was leaving Friday. 3 days ahead of schedule, couldn't risk staying through the week. His hands shook when he signed delivery invoices. Coworkers noticed he'd lost weight, looked 10 years older than he had in March. At 7 in the evening, he drove home and parked on the street in front of his building, a routine he'd followed for years without thinking about it. He saw the black van immediately, same one that had been circling for weeks, parked 30 feet away with the engine running. 200 people were on the street, summer evening in Howard Beach, kids playing, adults talking on stoops, the smell of grilled meat from backyard barbecues drifting through humid air. Favara's wife was watching from their apartment window on the 3rd floor, waiting for him to come up. 7:15, and Favara stepped out of his car, locked the door, turned toward the building entrance. The baseball bat came from behind, a full swing that connected with the base of his skull. He dropped instantly, keys falling from his hand and scattering on the pavement with a metallic jangle that nobody seemed to hear. The sound of impact, wood on bone, cut through street noise like a gunshot. But nobody reacted, nobody turned, nobody moved. 4 men moved fast. They grabbed Favara under the arms and legs while he was still conscious but stunned, bleeding from the head, unable to process what was happening. They dragged him to the van, lifted him through the open side door, threw him onto the metal floor. Doors slammed. The van accelerated away from the curb with tires squealing. Total elapsed time from bat strike to departure, 11 seconds. 200 witnesses on that street, families, teenagers, elderly residents sitting on stoops enjoying the evening. 0 people intervened. 0 people called police during the abduction. Favara's wife screamed from the window, her voice cutting through the summer night, begging someone to help, to stop them, to call for help. Nobody moved. The van turned the corner and disappeared into Queens traffic. Just another vehicle in the flow. On the pavement where Favara had stood, his car keys, his wallet, his eyeglasses. Small, ordinary objects that would become evidence in a case the FBI already knew would go nowhere. Police arrived 40 minutes later. Neighbors had finally called, reluctantly, anonymously, from payphones blocks away. Officers collected evidence, photographed the scene, interviewed witnesses. Every single person claimed they hadn't seen anything clearly, couldn't identify the men, didn't get a look at the van's license plate. Omerta in action, the code of silence that protected the Gambino family more effectively than any lawyer ever could. Howard Beach saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. The neighborhood closed ranks. What happened to John Favara was invisible, even though it happened in front of 200 witnesses in broad daylight. July 29, 1980, the FBI opened a missing person case on John Favara with full knowledge of who was responsible and zero evidence to prove it. Agents interviewed neighbors throughout Howard Beach. Every single person claimed ignorance. Didn't see anything. Was inside when it happened. Heard screaming but didn't look out the window. Favara's wife was hysterical. Told the full story from the March accident through the harassment, the death threats, Victoria's baseball bat attack, everything. She gave investigators a timeline, names, details. The FBI knew it was Gotti. They just couldn't prove it. John Gotti returned from Fort Lauderdale on July 30th, tanned and relaxed, with FBI surveillance photos showing him at a Fort Lauderdale casino during the exact time of Favara's abduction. Casino security tapes confirmed his presence. Dinner receipts. Witness statements from hotel staff. Bellhops who carried his luggage. Blackjack dealers who took his money. The alibi was airtight, professionally constructed, impossible to break. Forensic teams searched the abduction site. No useful evidence beyond the personal items Favara had dropped. No blood that could be tested. No fingerprints on the abandoned car keys. No body. No witnesses willing to testify. No forensic connection to Gotti or any Gambino associate. The motorized minibike was released from police evidence that week and returned to the Gotti family, a small bureaucratic note in a growing file. August 1980, and FBI agents conducted over 200 interviews with Howard Beach residents. Every conversation ended the same way. I don't know anything. I wasn't there. I can't help you. The agents knew they were being lied to. They could see it in the witnesses' faces, hear it in the careful phrasing of responses. But knowing and proving are different things. Favara's wife, receiving continued threats even after her husband's disappearance, entered witness protection and relocated under a new identity to a location the FBI wouldn't disclose, even in internal memos. She'd spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. FBI teams searched known Gambino disposal sites across New York and New Jersey, landfills, construction sites, waterfront locations where bodies had been dumped before. Nothing. John Favara's body was never found. The working theory, according to FBI reports, murdered within hours of abduction, body disposed of in a way that ensured it would never surface. Some claimed he was dissolved in acid. Others said he was buried in concrete at a construction site. The truth died with whoever handled the disposal. September 12, 1980, the FBI officially closed the case. The reasons cited in the public record: lack of cooperative witnesses and physical evidence necessary for prosecution. The real reason, known to every agent who worked the investigation: Omerta was unbreakable, Gotti was untouchable, and the American justice system had no mechanism for prosecuting crimes that entire communities refused to acknowledge. The Favara disappearance became legend in Queens, a story whispered in bars and barbershops, a warning about the cost of crossing the Gotti family even accidentally. The message was clear and traveled far. You can't touch the Gotti family, not even by accident, not even with the law on your side. John Gotti's power and reputation increased after Favara vanished. The kind of respect that comes from demonstrating you'll destroy anyone who harms your family, regardless of circumstances or legal protection. In 1985, Gotti orchestrated the assassination of Gambino boss Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan and took control of the entire crime family, becoming the most powerful mob boss in America. The Favara case was cited by federal prosecutors as evidence of Gotti's capacity for vengeance and his ability to operate with impunity. Victoria Gotti was never charged for the baseball bat attack on Favara. The case was closed without prosecution, witnesses having claimed self-defense. Frank Gotti's motorized minibike was kept in the family garage as a memorial, a physical reminder of the son they'd lost and the revenge they'd taken. In 1987, 7 years after his disappearance, John Favara was officially declared dead by court order. The FBI file remained open technically, but no active investigation continued. The case became a teaching tool about the limits of federal power. John Gotti was finally convicted in 1992 on murder and racketeering charges unrelated to Favara, jury tampering, the Castellano hit, witness intimidation, loan sharking. He died in prison in 2002, never having faced charges for Favara's disappearance. The Favara case was never solved in any legal sense. The body was never recovered. Favara's family never got closure, never got answers, never got justice. The Howard Beach Code of Silence became a textbook example in FBI training programs about the power of omertà and the limitations of federal law enforcement in communities where loyalty to organized crime runs deeper than cooperation with police. Decades later, the case files show what everyone already knew. Sometimes the FBI knows exactly what happened and can't do anything about it. The system failed John Favara twice, once when it couldn't protect him, and again when it couldn't prosecute his killers. The motorized minibike Frank Gotti had been riding on March 18, 1980, was eventually donated to a crime museum, a small chrome relic of childhood that triggered a chain of vengeance the FBI couldn't stop. The crushed front wheel still shows the impact damage. A small plaque explains the story. 12-year-old boy killed in accident. Neighbor disappeared 4 months later. Case never solved. Body never found. FBI agents who worked the investigation gave interviews years later, off the record, admitting what everyone knew. We understood who ordered it. We knew how it happened. We knew the van, the men, the disposal site. We just couldn't prove it in court. The case closed because some secrets everyone knows and nobody tells. The minibike sits behind glass now. Ordinary object, extraordinary consequences, permanent reminder of the day American justice lost to omertà. They came for Favara in front of 200 witnesses, and 200 witnesses saw nothing at all.